Good evening. Welcome to Bright Lights, hosted by myself, Lacy Johnson. And our guest this evening is going to be Mr. James McDonald. Mr. McDonald is founder and CEO of Hercules Investment out of Los Angeles. He's also a fund manager at Hercules. He's a registered investment advisor, and he has also a mutual fund listed on NASDAQ that's publicly traded called NFL HX. That's NFL, as the National Football League, HX. And you need to check it out. The ticker name for it is NFL HX, just like it says. Uh, Also, Mr. McDonald, as you will get to know him, is also an amateur football player. He loves football, as a matter of fact. In fact, that's mostly what we talked about when I talked to him in person. Also, and I find this amazing too, Mr. McDonald is an amateur champion boxer. And so he stayed active physically, and he's making some great things happen in the investment community. But now, here's the thing. What I really am excited about is that Mr. McDonald, James, as I'll call him, because we're getting to know each other, James is just very interested, dedicated, and committed to help change the economic conditions in economically disadvantaged communities. And so he has set his sight on Minneapolis. We've been talking about that. He's looking for entrepreneurs who start up companies in technology, finances, consumer products, etc., which he can invest in. In fact, he's looking to make people's dream come true as far as if they ever thought of running a business or whatever. And we will be providing the support needed to make these businesses successful. So that's all I'll tell you right now about James. As we go along in our interview, you will really find a lot more out about him, what an interesting, educated, knowledgeable person he is, what a dedicated, sincere person he is, and you will get that all during our interview that's coming up. So stay tuned. This is Lacy Johnson. The voice you hear next will be me and Mr. James McDonald. James, how are you?
Excited to talk to you again, Lacy. Everything is great here.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah. So let's get into it, James. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up being such a great investor and investment manager at this stage, and what in your life was happened that would predict that.
Sure. Well, I think, first of all, we have to say thank you for having me on today. It's exciting to see you and talk to you. And anytime we get an opportunity to share our perspectives and our stories, it potentially has a positive impact on others. And I'm always excited about that. And my journey, like a lot of people's journey, has had a lot of fits and starts and ups and downs. And getting where we are is certainly not easy. And so I think, part of the message that we have to communicate to anyone is to get where you want to go. You have to keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. And that persistence is something that has been a thread that's woven all my experiences together in life. I have to credit my parents. Parenting is very underrated. We learn and we know what is taught to us. My father was an extraordinarily persistent entrepreneur, and my mother was an extraordinarily persistent and devoted teacher of her children and mother. I have 4 brothers, and I'm the dumb athlete in my sibling class, and my brothers are all extraordinary. And I think it has to do with our parents. And I learned at a very early age from my father about work ethic. My older brother was a year older than me, and he had severe asthma. And I can remember there were times when he would wake up wheezing and coughing and at all times in the morning. And one particular time, I must have been 3 or 4 years old. I remember my brother was having an asthma attack, and it was the middle of the night. And what struck me is that when I woke up, listening to my brother's wheezing, I saw the light on in my father's office. He was working at 3 or 4 in the morning, and that was the norm for me, to observe my father's work ethic, a tireless work ethic, consistent, persistent work ethic that was just unmatched, and that embedded in me what was supposed to be. And my mother was a devoted teacher. She taught me how to read. I was homeschooled through 6th grade, and that foundation provided me with a great platform to go and pursue my goals, whether athletic or professional. I learned about the investment industry late, relatively. We read about now teenagers and middle schoolers trading stocks, and I didn't even know what a stock was until I was probably a senior in high school and didn't have a command of it. But read a book about an entrepreneur, a guy named Reginald Brown, and I discovered that book because I had started a nonprofit, and one of our board members, Felicia Lopez Walker, her husband, was the author of that book, Blair Walker. And she said, hey, you should check out this book. And I read the book, and I had no idea that people could make hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars in any career. And it was important to me because, as persistent as my father was, he struggled a lot as an entrepreneur. And I saw him succeed and I saw him fail. And so I had a strong desire to be successful and kind of avoid some of the challenges that my father had. And I read the book about Reginald Walker, and he matriculated at Harvard Law School. And so I had to go to Harvard, and, I took a circuitous path to Harvard. I originally went to a state school and had a football injury and had to drop out because of the severity of my injury. And when I went back to school, I made sure that I went to the best school in the world. That's what it was at that time, and probably still is. The Princeton and Stanford people will debate that. But I took advantage of the education while I was there. And so I'd say the two foundations are, parenting, having a household that guides you the right way, and then getting an education, the best education that's available to you. And, when I was at Harvard, people asked me about the parties or the lifestyle. I was in the libraries, man. There were 250 libraries there. I was in the libraries if I wasn't in class, soaking up every bit of information I could. And that has really prepared me for my career.
That's a great story. I have a similar one, and we'll focus on that. I visited an actor friend of mine in New York City back in the 80s, I think late 80s. And after the limousine would come and pick him up and take him to the NBC studio every morning, I'd sit there and have some coffee. And he had a book on tax shelters laying on his table. And I read that, and it just clicked on me. This system is set up to promote businesses and things like that. It's not for individuals. So that changed my whole outlook on economics and everything. Also, you mentioned a couple of things that I think is key. Family, and sound like you had a 2-parent home, and I think
Yes.
that is a big key, even though people try to, it's not politically correct to say that nowadays. And you also mentioned education, and you combine that with a mentor, a role model in business. And so those are the three things I think, as we progress and succeed in those areas, it will get to the root causes of a lot of issues that's going on in our community. So I really appreciate that about you. Now, speaking of our community, there's a large amount of young people nowadays that don't trust the system. In fact, almost to the point where they don't even want to participate in it.
Right.
And we know that there are, yes, it's competitive, it can be tough, but we can't stay away from competition and toughness.
Right.
What would be your message to a young person out there who's saying, no need of me trying, the system is all rigged, et cetera, et cetera? What would be your message, especially those young people in these disadvantaged communities?
It's a great question. And, throughout the generations, there persists rebelliousness from the youth. Any generation you go, change is sought out. I think it's important for young people to understand context. This social experiment, this political experiment called free enterprise, called democracy, is just that. It's very young in the context of world history. And if you study history, this place wasn't set up for fairness. It wasn't set up for equality. It wasn't set up so that everybody could be happy. It was set up to protect the guns and the gold from the king and the queen.
Yes.
That's why we were set up. It was a revolution against the British Empire. And in that context, this country was established among principles of building your own wealth and building your own future aside from your bloodlines, aside from control from a monarchy. And in that context, we are all responsible for our own trajectory. We're all responsible for our own life. And I think that if you understand how and why this place was set up and understand what the Constitution really means, it means that we have an opportunity away from a king and a queen to make our own life and make our own future. And no one's going to give anything to us. We have to go out and set goals and work extremely hard to reach those goals. And I think if young people understand that and understand that this is not set up for you and everyone else to be happy, for you and everyone else to get ahead, it's set up for equality of opportunity. And we know as African Americans that we are behind a huge 8 ball with that, but we're catching up quickly. And every single day and every single decade and every single generation, we're making advances. And now it's your turn. You can go out and you can create a whole new set of possibilities. Unfortunately, many of the ills of society and many of the ills of politics have been overcome, not just for African Americans, for people, for women, and for people from other minority groups, including those that have different lifestyle preferences. If you think about where we are today compared to where we were 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, the opportunity for you is humongous, and there should be no excuses as to why you can't set your goals and go reach them.
You hit on quite a few key areas there. First of all, this generation versus the previous generation. And what I find is that the older generation has a context of what's going on. I tell people, I remember the time where I think we see maybe one black face on TV a month. I still remember the time when they were putting white artist pictures on black musicians and black singers' albums. And so we've seen so much. I mean, well, let's face it, the #1 football dynasty in the country right now is Alabama. And, some of us still remember the time when Alabama didn't have any black players on his team. And we remember the time when the northern colleges were dominating sports because they were going down getting the black athletes. So what I'm trying to say, if you got the context, you've seen how much improvement has happened. And that's why we take a different look. The other thing you mentioned is just the competition side. And I heard somewhere that perhaps a majority of the people on Wall Street are former athletes. And when you have that thirst for competition, which I've always had all my life, I didn't care. It really didn't matter to me what the rules were or whether it was fair or not. It's just that I had a goal I wanted to get to and whatever it took to get there. And you also mentioned whether or not it was fair. And I love to tell people, my dad always told me, son, fair is the place where they judge pigs. So I don't even want to hear you complain about whether things are fair or not. Just you better get went out there and work and go to work. Couple of things too. Take a minute or two to explain to our audience how Wall Street works.
Sure. Wow, a minute or two. And so, in essence, it takes money to make money. Let's just start there. Mm-hmm. And that's a general rule. You can't really make money without some resource capital. Mm-hmm. Wall Street is a euphemism to describe the place where traditionally banks and brokers, businesses that introduced entrepreneurs to lenders or investors, it's where it all started. And Wall Street exists to provide capital to businesses so that they can grow. And that capital comes from a few different places. It comes from individual investors like you and I who can open a brokerage account and put our savings or our capital in it, and then use that brokerage account to invest in companies so that they can grow. And if they do, we should see a return on our investment. And then the other sources of capital are institutions. We as employees generally have 401k plans or some type of retirement plans. Well, those assets don't just sit. Those assets are invested by institutional investors, and institutional investors buy stocks and buy bonds and invest their money into companies so that they can grow. And so Wall Street is a place where people invest, organizations and institutions invest, and then entrepreneurs or businesses can find capital to make more money. And so that's what the marriage of Wall Street does, is it introduces capital to businesses so that money can generate more money.
Excellent description there. Speaking of bringing Wall Street to bear in various areas and various businesses, there's something out there that's called the opportunity zone. And really, as I see it, what it does is encourage people with money to invest in these economically disadvantaged communities. What is your opinion of fundamentally how that whole opportunity zone designation, which came out of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Job Act? Tell me how you feel and what you see at the potential of the opportunity zone type of funding for disadvantaged economic communities.
Well, there are a lot of layers to this, and so let's just start with the economics of it. There are penalties for making money in America, and they're called taxes. And taxes are levied on profits so that the government has the ability to have a budget for police officers and firefighters and school teachers and all of those important functions in any society to allow us to live and enjoy life safely and healthfully. And the government budget comes from taxes. And taxes can be a big strain on investors who have experienced a profitable outcome. And obviously, if it takes money to make money, with less money from a taxable situation, there's an incentive to minimize taxes. And so the empowerment zone that came out of the Rodney King riots, where you have a neighborhood that's been dilapidated and a social disadvantage in an economically disadvantaged area, which then promotes a lot of crime and promotes a lot of heartache and is a vacuum of progress. The government has decided that if we can incentivize investors to put money to work in a way that's going to reduce the impoverishment, in a way that's going to increase jobs, in a way that's going to develop the socioeconomic status of an area to lift up all members of a community, not just in the rich neighborhoods and in the nice neighborhoods, but in the disadvantaged ones. If taxes could be reduced or even avoided, that capital would then have an incentive to move in. And so it's a beautiful concept where I, as an investor, or institution as an investor, can make more money by paying less taxes if I invest in areas that have a socioeconomic disadvantage and have experienced all of the consequences of socioeconomic disadvantages, which are increased crime, increased drug use and abuse, increased, or I should say lower education. And it just, these are the factors that lead to, let's just call it a troubled life and a troubled society. If we can get some of the root causes of crime and some of the root causes of poverty or economic inequality mitigated, then we can, as a society, lift up more members and all benefit. And so the zone concept is a periphery, an area where there is a heightened need for capital and a heightened need for progress, but a lower tax burden. I think it's a beautiful idea, and it's something that all people recognize as a benefit. I read recently that, when I first was exposed to finance, I mentioned I read about Reggie Brown and his success. What really got my attention in the book was Mike Milken and what he did with junk bonds.
Oh, yeah.
This guy made billions of dollars in a short period of time, revolutionized his interest. I just saw that Mike Milken, this is a guy worth billions and billions of dollars and has created hundreds of billionaires through his businesses, is investing in an opportunity zone because of the tax benefits in Nevada. And so this is something that people from across the spectrum of wealth can look at as a viable, strong investment, but then also have a philosophical, a philanthropic, and a civic-minded vested interest in improving society while seeking a return on their capital.
That whole topic of milking and derivatives, that's like a blast from the past, as they say. I didn't know that he was still out there doing some great things. I do know also that for you, and you just indicated that it's not just about making the money. You feel some type of responsibility as a person, as a corporate citizen. Why don't you share with us briefly just your whole outlook and philosophy on how you give back, and it's not just a greedy person out here trying to make as much money as he can.
Right. Yeah, I mentioned I really originally went to a state school out of high school, blew my knee out my freshman year in high school, and had to drop out because there was no hospital that could take care of my leg where I went to school. And when I dropped out as a 19-year-old, I hung out with my friends that didn't go to college and saw firsthand the terrible options that were available for young Black men in the DC area during the crack epidemic. And it motivated me to start a nonprofit. And I call that nonprofit Options. It was an acronym for opportunities provided through interactively organized network systems, a big, long-winded description for a mentorship, academic enrichment, and career training program that put what I thought were the most important people into a situation where they could discover their own talent. I know a lot of criminal activities require ambition, courage, intelligence, and toughness. Those are the same things that are required to be successful academically and professionally. And so I wanted to show my peers the options they had by pursuing a good life through legal and traditional means, education and career. And I started a nonprofit, and our nonprofit was pretty successful. And that civic mindedness in me is what really triggered my own intellectual development. I didn't know I could be successful at fundraising. I didn't know I could successfully present to executives and get nodding heads and yes and written checks. And so after a while, I wanted to be the person that wrote the checks myself rather than ask for them. And that's when I transferred to Harvard and pursued my financial career. But the civic mindedness that keeps society with potential is important in all of us. It's something that has to be done right, though. There are a lot of nonprofits that struggle. There are a lot of, particularly in our community, there are a lot of service providers who are well-meaning, but lack the resources and or the rigor of business capabilities to make as big as an impact as could be. But it's something that I think everyone has some calling to serve in a context where your fellow man can benefit from your knowledge or can benefit from your network or can benefit from your financial resources. And I think that's something that remains important to me.
James, you just casually mentioned how you transferred from State College to Harvard, as if it was just a piece of cake.
Right.
And I know it was not a piece of cake. I'm assuming it wasn't. So what kind of hoops did you have to jump through to transfer from State College to Harvard?
Right. Well, I'm a very driven individual, and I pursued my nonprofit with a passion that you wouldn't believe. It blew me away that people who look like me and friends and peers could get killed in the street and nobody cared. And I pursued it with a passion. I happened to be in the DC area where there are a lot of Fortune 100 companies, AmLaw 100 firms, and I went after them. And the skills that I developed in interfacing with C-suite executives at literally the largest and most profitable organizations in the world, because of the passion that I had for what I was doing, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't intimidated. I didn't believe in the mystique. And I could sit and talk to a JW Marriott or the head of Lockheed or the head of IBM or any business and look them in the eye and tell them why they needed to support my program. Through that process, I saw directly what it took to get to the C-suite and knew that, Harvard would be a good education for me. Mother did teach me to read well. And so I took several tests and I had to test in. And when I got there, it was a breeze. I don't say this often publicly, but, I wasn't intellectually challenged by the academics at Harvard because I knew exactly what I had to do. I had met people in industry and knew that the people at the top of industry had great educations. There's a lot of great educations outside of Harvard, but I definitely took advantage of it while I was there. I'm proud to say my daughter was accepted to the class of 2025 here a couple weeks ago. And, when she was born, I knew she was going to Harvard, and she did 18 years later. There's something in our bloodline with intensity, and that's what it takes. And Harvard is a lot of things to a lot of people, but the most important thing is it's a good education, and I think that's the point that young people and all people need to get. I was 29 years old when I graduated from Harvard. I was a non-traditional student, and so I also had a little bit more maturity to know what I was going to do. But like I said, it's just about a great education more so than the name of the school.
So as one who was not fortunate enough to transfer from a state college to Harvard, we've talked about this, I think, aside from the great education. Oh, and by the way, I had a son who went to Brown, and so I know about what the subject area I'm getting ready to broach here. Tell us about the networks that you established there that are very advantageous as you go forward in life. How does that whole network go? And because I think that's probably, it might be even more important than the education, but tell me what you think about the whole area of establishing these networks and as a result of being a Harvard graduate or an Ivy League graduate or
I'll
Stanford
answer
graduate.
that, but I'll say also, you don't need to go to a fancy school to build a strong network. The nonprofit that I built before I went to school, I built a network. And if you are tenacious, have integrity, work hard, and work smart, you will attract like-minded people. And with those relationships, you can expand the reach and potential of getting your ideas executed. When it comes to the Harvard network, there's this concept called normalization, right? And so among us alumni, I mean, it's a normal thing, right? That's just where we went to school. And within the different networks of Harvard grads, you have different tiers of people. Many are service oriented, many are socially oriented, many are mission oriented. Harvard comprises a university that has, like other universities, as much emphasis on improving the world as it does making money. And there are a lot of people who are passionate about change outside of making a dollar. In the context of how I've leveraged my Harvard network, it's been probably on the less aggressive end because as an individual, I really am very focused on the goals that I have set out. Haven't needed a ton of networking. I find myself probably providing more mentorship to young Harvard grads than I do seeking out Harvard relationships. But I will say, when I encounter a fellow Harvard grad, I know there's a rigor of intellect there. And I give them the benefit of the doubt as well as I get the benefit of the doubt because of that association. But there is a rigor there for all schools. I think something that I want to address outside of the elitist concept of Harvard is there's a lot of young people that haven't finished school. There's a lot of grown folks that haven't finished school, and there's somewhat of an intimidation about going back and finishing. You don't have to go to Harvard, but if you go back and you finish school, regardless of what age you are, it's to your advantage because the same respect and acknowledgement of intellectual rigor that happens among Ivy League graduates happens among all college graduates. And
that's a good point.
There's a concept that someone will whisper in your ear after you graduate and they say, "Welcome to the world of the educated." There is an implicit respect there and assumption of training that you've received, that you know how to read and you know how to write correctly and you know how to solve problems. It's important to finish your education regardless of the prestige of the school.
I like your story earlier, how you, while everybody else was out partying, you were studying and in the library, similar type of experience. And I just used to play mind tricks with myself on a Saturday night when I'm going to the library. I'm imagining I'm a scientist going into a research lab and doing all this great work. Going back to another thing, when you were describing Wall Street and the stock market and everything, you mentioned how people would take their own money, risk it, work hard, sacrifice. Where I'm getting to, James, is that because of the recent pandemic and some of the other issues, we've got a lot of people who have risked everything and have either lost everything or very close to losing everything. How do you feel about that whole situation where really a lot of people are put out of business by this, and a lot of them are never going to come back? How do you see that whole situation? And is it something we could have either prevented or mitigated in a very, very strong way?
Wow, it's a difficult question to answer because on the one hand, perhaps the most deadly threat we faced in our lifetime was met with a response from the pharmaceutical industry that is without precedent. The amount of work and diligence that went into creating a vaccine and logistical challenges into getting people vaccinated, it's one of the greatest accomplishments in human history. It could have been so much worse. And we're reading headlines about the ravaging effects of COVID in India right now. We could have 10-15% of our population wiped out were it not for the magic and hard work of the pharmaceutical industries. Now, having said that, this disruption the pandemic has caused is without peer. We are still grappling with the scope and the implications of what's happened. It's affected our business. It's affected my ability to read markets. It's affected my ability to navigate markets in a very, very challenging way. We have never seen anything like this before. And what I noticed that's so different about this pandemic is the paradox. As difficult as things became, markets and Wall Street became stronger. The implementation of monetary policy with no consideration of future debt, no consideration of balance sheet management, only the consideration of maintaining calm and confidence has created this fervor of stock market buying that is without precedent. If we look back to the roaring 20s where stock markets were soaring and then had a collapse in 1929, this outguns the 1920s bull market by 20%. If we look into the dot-com era in 2000, where the prospect of technology had companies with no business plan with multi-billion-dollar valuations, we've exceeded those levels. We are at such a high level of valuation now across our markets, across our asset classes. Houses are now selling for 30-40% more than they were worth just a year ago. Mm-hmm. When bankruptcies and corporate debt and delinquencies and evictions that would be implemented and foreclosures that would be implemented are at the highest levels, we have this paradox where in the most challenging of situations, we have the most prosperity as it relates to stock market prices. For those businesses that were shuttered, for those people who are dependent on paycheck protection, and for those people that are receiving government benefits, it is a time bomb. And what we're looking at is the potential unwinding of our lifetime's most severe crisis and most effusive stock market environment. It's a very, very difficult market to read. It's a very, very difficult time to predict what will happen. And we're very vigilant here at Hercules Investments that, a reckoning is coming. We do think the market is going to realize what must be done, which is the valuations of businesses should reflect the prospect of those businesses.
Speaking of that, I know in your field, there's something called a market correction. Mm-hmm. Are we talking more than your normal market correction here?
Right. So I've been wrong on this. I've been calling for, a severe market correction since last May, and the opposite has happened. The market has gone straight up. We did see a 10% correction. The word correction has a pretty strong association with a 10% decline in stocks. And we did see that on the Russell 2000. We saw on the NASDAQ, but we haven't seen it on the Dow. We haven't seen it on the S&P 500 yet. But we're 23.5% more valuable as an entire stock market than we were just before the pandemic hit. And just before the pandemic hit, we were at all-time highs. We had followed from March of 2009 a trajectory where stocks had risen higher and for longer than they ever had in history. And so, like I said, we're sitting in a very, very strong paradox where the most dangerous outside of nuclear war risk that we've seen has stimulated and has prompted the most prosperous stock market. And Wall Street and Main Street have a divide. And that divide is the wealth of the wealthiest has ballooned, and the economic vulnerability of the least wealthy has continued to sap. And what we have is a reckoning coming that's going to be very challenging. We heard from the Fed chair today where they reiterated their commitment to monitor and be vigilant what COVID and what recovery looks like. And so there's going to be no raising of interest rates like there normally we would in this type of inflationary environment where we have the price of lumber 150% higher than it's ever been, the price of houses 40% higher than they were in previous bubbles. And so this may continue for some time, but we believe strongly here at Hercules that there will be a reckoning, and we intend to profit from it, to be frank with you.
The whole area of the Fed and their monetary policy, that's a whole long discussion there. But you did hit on deficit spending. You did hit on the debt, monetary policy, and perhaps some of the impact that some of the deficit spending because of COVID is going to have on the future. We do know that historically, once we went off the gold standards and everything else and went to currency and paper money, that there's a lot of people who think that was a big mistake. And we also have a situation where there's something that's come out recently called the modern monetary theory. I'm quite sure you're familiar with that. Those of us who are novice at that, we can't understand how anyone would think that that would work. What's your opinion? And I didn't want to prejudge anything, but what's your opinion of this whole new modern monetary theory?
Well, the government has always been there to provide security. Mm-hmm. And I like to drive cars, and sometimes me and my car club will go to the canyons and to the mountains, and we'll like to drive in the winding roads and experience that. At every bend or turn, there's a guardrail. Mm-hmm. On every highway where there's speed in different directions, there are guardrails, there are barriers. And those barriers were set up by the government to protect us. Mm-hmm. And what the modern current monetary policy stance is, it's a set of guardrails. It's a set of guardrails that protect us from spiraling unemployment, turning into a recession, turning into a run on banks, turning into a cataclysmic social environment. The guardrails of providing liquidity to banks, the guardrails of providing income to consumers. I mean, Lacy, if I had said to you 2 years ago when the stock market was hitting all-time highs, or last year when the stock market was hitting all-time highs, if we had said to you, you know what, we're going to give, as a monetary policy practice, as a fiscal practice, we're going to give every household that doesn't have a job or lost their job a paycheck to replace it. And they're not going to have to work for it. We're going to defer, delay, or change the need to pay taxes on time. You would have said this is some Orwellian fantasy. Mm-hmm. It can never happen. But that's what we've been doing for the past 10 months or so. We've been giving money away, and the promises are to keep doing that as long as it takes. It is an impossibly difficult situation to have predicted, but the Fed understood what the risk was. If we allowed COVID to ravage the communities by allowing businesses and people to continue to go as they would, we would have a potential health crisis like we've never seen before, which would then become a national security risk, which we will not allow. Mm-hmm. So they said, we're going to pay you to stay home. And the businesses that close and the companies that couldn't get past it will suffer. But now we're sitting with complacency in our economy where the perception is that things are going to be fine. And it's difficult to see how that's going to be the case. But the government as an investor, they don't have a time horizon. When we sit and think about our investments, we know that, you know, we have our earning years and our saving years, and then we're going to retire, and then we're going to die. And this is how much money we need by this period of time. The government's timeline, their return on investment, it can be infinity. they don't have any time horizon for a return on their investments. And so they can keep printing money and they can keep giving money away and they can keep assuaging the market so that those guardrails are in place. We don't want to see chaos, and we take for granted the freedom that we have. We don't have to worry about rocket propelled grenades flying into our bedroom window. We don't have to worry about our daughters and mothers being raped with rifle butts by militiamen. We don't have that worry. But that's what happens in economies that collapse. Right. Militias take over and people with malintent seek power. And that was a risk. We had riots, we had economic chaos, we had a lack of control, we had crowds, bullying, law enforcement. It became a risk. And so all of those reasons contribute to why the Fed will continue to provide support to whatever extent it needs. And then on the backdrop of that, we have a lot of businesses that were pandemic proof, digital businesses like Amazon, businesses like Netflix, businesses like Google and Microsoft, where all their products are digital. And with us in this forum here today doing a podcast digitally, these services are in high demand. And so there's been a lot of profits generated, but then there's been a lot of support and guardrails set up by the government. And I think those guardrails will probably stay. The next generation of investors, it'll be interesting to see the next time there's a potential national crisis, how stock markets behave. This bull market could be pale in comparison to the next one when this comes around.
You mentioned your interest in cars. Tell me something about that, how far back it goes, what have been your all-time favorite car, as you go along and when you make your first billion, what is the one car that you want to buy? So just tell us a little bit about your interest in cars and how all that works.
Yeah, fortunately, I hit all my goals with cars. As a kid, I didn't have the internet. I had magazines, and I was never interested in the comic books. And so I read the car magazines, and my goal was to always have a Porsche 911 Turbo. I'll tell you a quick story. As a high school senior, I worked at a gas station that had a detailing bay, and we would take the cars to go get lunch. And one day there was a 911 Turbo there, and I took it and I wrecked it. And they tried to get me in trouble, but they knew we always took cars. It was part of the practice. And a comment was made by the owner of the gas station. He said, "Well, you'll never own that car." And I think I've owned 4 of them now, 911 Turbos. And that was always my dream car. But yeah, I've bought all the Lamborghinis, all the Ferraris. It's pretty much one of those things where, I kind of did that. I do like driving fast. But my focus now is business. We talked just a minute ago, this pandemic has really humbled us. We've been short this market since May, and it's gone straight up. And so we're going through a challenging time with navigating the risk in this market for our clients and for our own company. And so no more fast cars right now for me. It's sitting in this chair, getting my job done.
Okay, so I try to respect the time of my guests. So we're going to start winding it down here now. A couple of quick things also. Tell us a little bit about your athletic career. I was surprised to hear some of the things that you do and you've been doing. So why don't you let the audience in on your athletic prowess, James?
Right. I was probably never a good athlete, but I had willpower as strong as any elite athlete. And I mentioned I was homeschooled. It wasn't because of choice. I got in a lot of fights in elementary school. And finally, my mom just pulled me out and she taught me how to read and write. She did. And when we moved to the East Coast, so I grew up in Phoenix through 6th grade. We moved to the East Coast. My parents said, we got to do something with this aggressive energy, put me in football. I didn't know how it worked, but I knew I got to hit people and I really liked it. I was undersized. I was 6th grade playing with 4th graders. I was about the same size. And I liked hitting a lot. I really liked hitting a lot. And then my parents had something on me. They said, if you don't stay out of trouble at school, you can't play football. And that's what really kept me in academics. And I was always undersized. I was a 100-pound freshman in high school. I was a 150-pound senior in high school. But I hit harder than anybody else. I knew I was good. blew my knee out when I was 19, but when I was 35, I got a second chance. I had an orthopedic surgeon as an investment client and told him the story of my knee injury. And he said, let me fix you up. So when I was 35 years old, I got my knee fixed and discovered semi-pro football. And from 2006 until 2019, I proceeded to go around the country and knock the hell out of everybody on every football field I could find. I would sign up for the number one team in the country. I would fly there, I would get an apartment, and I would try out for the team, and I would proceed to beat the hell out of every player I could find. And in every league I played in, I did earn the respect of my teammates and my opponents as being one of the hardest hitters out there. I was very blessed to get a second chance. Want to make sure people don't give up on their dreams. For me, football became a dream throughout high school. And when I lost my knee at 19, I kind of was depressed after that. But when I got the second chance in semi-pro, let me tell you, I was right up until the end, 2019, and 47, 48 years old. I led the league in tackles, won defensive MVP of my team, and runner-up defensive MVP for the league, and won the championship. And you know, every player that played on a team with me or in a league with me will tell you that I was one of the hardest hitters out there. And that's just part of my energy. Picked up boxing in 2019 and won a heavyweight championship here in Southern California. And I might go back to boxing. I have a little football injury I need to get back. But, you know, this market's been punching me in the face for 9 months. I'm ready to punch back. And I feel sorry for whoever I get in the ring with if I get back into that.
So, James, help me understand this. In the boxing arena, we're not talking about a 72-year-old Larry Holmes or something you're beating up on. We're talking about really competitive boxing, right? What's your record? Number one.
Undefeated.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I got to ask this question too. Have you ever been knocked out, James?
No, never been knocked out, never been knocked down. Never been beaten. And, you know, with respect to boxers who are the best in the world, they lose, they do get knocked out, they do get beaten, but not yet. And, you know, I tell people when I was playing football, you know, I'm still looking for somebody who put me on my back. I never found it. But, you know, boxing is a sport I have to give deference to and respect because, you know, those guys have been doing it since they were been 8, 9 years old. Most boxers are more skilled than me, but few boxers are more willed than me. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, it is a sport of willpower.
Okay. Continuing the athletic theme, I guess, I'm going to throw you a couple of little curveballs or knuckleballs here, or however you want to call it. You were involved in investment in Wall Street, I think back in 2011 when Occupy Wall Street was doing their thing and criticizing capitalism and things like that. How did you feel about that whole movement? And do you think it brought any benefits or just an awareness? How did you feel about that whole movement?
Actually, it was in New York. So I was actually in Manhattan over by the Lincoln Center during a protest, watching people get arrested. You know, this is, you know, they call it, let's just call it on the wealth divide. And it's a very troubling thing to walk up to a skyscraper. Every major city has a bank and an energy company and, you know, a real estate holder that has a skyscraper. And many of them make millions and millions of dollars a day. It's a sad thing at night to walk to that building and see someone sleeping on a grate, a homeless person at the foot of basically a tower of wealth. It's mind-boggling, and I get it. The Occupy Wall Street movement was a protest. But as I said, as we discussed, this country was set up to protect the guns and gold from the king and the queen. It wasn't set up for everybody to be okay no matter what. And, you know, thank goodness for philanthropy. Thank goodness for civic-minded individuals and foundations. But this is a problem that we have to do something about. And I hear you talking about it all the time. The root causes of poverty need to be weeded out. We need to get young teenage mothers education. We need to get them parental training. We need to get toddlers of individuals from single parent homes and or socially disadvantaged areas economically. We need to get tutors in there to read it. My mother read to me. I saw so many books at 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. I didn't want to see another book, but that's why I've been successful. It's because of what I was taught. And I think the Occupy Wall Street concept, the protest concept, is a lagging indicator of what can be done. The leading indicators are education, early education, getting people who are socially and economically disadvantaged the tools necessary. I want to say there's so many programs out there for the gifted and talented. We need programs for everyone else. I would have never qualified for Inroads, a organization that took gifted and talented African Americans and introduced them to opportunities. And we need inroads for the kids that aren't doing well. And I am very passionate about that, and it's something I intend to work with you on. It's not about protesting; it's about preventing, I think.
Yes.
To really address some of the challenges. But when there are things that are wrong, I think about other areas. We've seen asbestos, we've seen Superfund, we've seen criminal activity at a high corporate level. That needs to get rooted out. I think there is a need for activism there to protect us because there are a lot of bad actors in the corporate world. But to target Wall Street all across the board, I think it's misplaced energy.
Okay, quickly, you did mention being in New York and Lincoln Center. Quickly, I'm assuming you've gone to jazz at the Lincoln Center.
Yes.
Isn't that a wonderful event?
It is. I like the restaurant there on the second floor, Porterhouse. It's one of my favorite restaurants in the world.
Oh yeah, and just look up in the building and Wynton Marsala's, and
yes.
I mean, it's just an amazing event that everybody should experience once in their life.
I love New York.
I love New York too, and I haven't been back since the pandemic. I'm looking to get back there. New York is my favorite city.
You wouldn't recognize it, man. We took our fund. I run a fund called NFLHX. Ode to my desire to own an NFL team, and we took the fund public in Times Square. I've never seen Times Square so empty. The social distancing that was happening. This was January 29th. New York has looked like a ghost town. You wouldn't recognize it.
I should make a clarification for my audience out there. I said New York was my favorite city. It's actually my second favorite city. Most people who know me know that my hometown, my little hometown in Mississippi, Natchez, is just my all-time favorite city. Another quick little curve or knuckle here. Black Lives Matter. It's also like a protest group. They have received a massive amount of funding. Do you have any, and we don't want to be too controversial, but do you have any suggestion of how that money could be used and deployed to address some of these root cause issues in these communities of which they express concern?
Right, and I say this with no hesitation. I don't know what the efficacy of Black Lives Matter is or is not. It's a concept that has been commercially moved into an organization. And I think that, if I can just expand outside of Black Lives Matter into these themes, the Me Too movement, we saw people who had gotten away with sexual intimidation and sexual harassment rooted out of corporate America, people that have been mainstays for decades, eliminated because of a movement, the Me Too movement. And it was a beautiful thing. I have a mother, I have a daughter, I have many cousins who are women and aunts. And it was a wonderful thing to see a movement root out embedded unfairness and injustice. And I hoped when Black Lives Matter came to fore, the phrase Black Lives Matter is irrefutable. Of course, Black Lives Matter. I've been unconvinced that the organization behind the theme has been efficacious to institute change like the Me Too movement did. Charlie Rose is out. Roger Ailes is out. I could go down a list of 100 men who had power taken away because of the movement. I don't know that I can enumerate change from Black Lives Matter, where evildoers or wrongdoers have been rooted out. And I'd like to see that. To the answer to your question, I think that we need more than an idea to get progress. I think we need people like you, people who move between the business world with the empowerment zones and the political world and are willing to stand up in a perhaps non-traditional way as an African-American Republican to say, listen, we do matter, but what we do matters, right? And I haven't seen that from BLM. And I think that if I could use a magic wand and direct their funds, it would be to prevention and intervention, and to show more headlines like the Morris Brown has been reopened. I'd like to see Black Lives Matter put money into that campus. It's got its new accreditation and get more education. I'd like to see Black Lives Matter put money into HBCUs and put money into recruiting tutors to go into the inner cities. And if you're a 14, 15, 16-year-old teenage mom and your parents can't educate you because they lack education, what does it say for your future? What does it say for your children's future? I like to see Black Lives Matter go in and get tutoring done and parenting education. If people read to their children like my mother read to me, we would have a tremendous impact on society. And this is true for most people who've been able to reach their goals and or aspire to reach their goals. And so I don't know that Black Lives Matter is making that impact. I'm not criticizing them. I'm just looking at what Me Too did in terms of effectuating change, you know, practically overnight. I'm still waiting to see that with BLM.
Okay. And I understand now that Hercules has at least one fund right now. Tell us about that fund and any other funds that you have, and any future plans you have in that area.
Well, we're in a battle. We've been very persistent that this market is overvalued and coming down, and it's gone straight up. So we're in a battle with this market, and we have a fund, NFLHX, that is designed to perform when markets fall. NFLHX is the only publicly traded 2 in 20 fund. We plan to launch 11 additional funds that have the same feature where if markets fall, the fund has the potential to rise. And we're going to cover all the important categories: e-commerce, artificial intelligence, green energy, healthcare, all of the areas that we know that will be disruptive technologies in the future, ecologically friendly vehicles, self-driving vehicles. And we're going to get these funds here out in the next 6 to 12 months and really make an impact on the industry. We've got to survive this bull market, though. It's been an incredible journey to see this market go straight up in the midst of a pandemic.
James, I could sit and talk and discuss economics, investment, monetary policy, and for a long time. But I'm going to wrap it up by asking you, what would you say? Because to be honest with my audience here, I'm often thinking about some young people who may be sitting and listening to us, and trying to wonder what goals they should have and what goals they can achieve. What would you say to the younger generation out there if they are interested in moving into the investment field, and they are just skeptical and concerned, either that they don't have the confidence they can do it, they don't think it works? What would you say to our younger generation out there based on your knowledge and experience?
Right. Well, you have to have the audacity of hope. And I'm quoting a fellow you may know about, Barack Obama. You know, if someone had aspired to be president of the United States and their skin color was like Lacy's and mine, they may have been called foolhardy. They may have been called unrealistic. And, you know, he did it. And I think that even as a Republican, I have to point to his story to say, look what's possible when you have the courage to pursue your goals and your dreams. And in the pursuit of your goals and your dreams, understand you're going to have challenges. And one of the things I have to say now is that, the challenges of reaching your goal and keeping your goal in place can be immense, but you can never, ever, ever give up. And at some point, once you decide to pursue that goal, you're going to run into roadblocks, and you're going to hear people tell you, you can't do this or you can't do that. And it can be extremely challenging to stay self-confident, but you have to do so. And I'm a living testimonial of it. By not quitting, you find yourself winning. And if you have a setback, by not quitting, you find yourself moving forward. And that's really important. Know that you can pursue anything that you want. Know that there are going to be setbacks and challenges, and know that to get there, you have to never, ever quit.
Well, James, this has been a very rewarding experience talking with you. We'll have to get you back on again because, like I said, I can talk about it forever. Looking forward to seeing you either in Los Angeles or seeing you here in Minneapolis. I think we have a lot of things in common that we're trying to accomplish and set the standard for. So I really appreciate that. And I'm going to end this Bright Lights episode with this question, James. Mm-hmm. With your love of these turbocharged Porsches, how many speeding tickets have you gotten, James?
None that have been finished. You have to get the right lawyer.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you very much. I know you're constantly trading. I know you're the chief trader for your investment firm. So we really appreciate it. Have a great time out in LA. Have a great dinner and look forward to seeing you soon.
It's been great. Thank you so much, Lacy.
Okay. And thanks to my audience out there for joining us again. We really appreciate it. We hope to keep offering you more knowledge, more information, more encouragement. And my thing has always been, if James can do it, I can do it. And if I can do it, you can do it. And so when we look around, and I think James and I both from a similar background, I never ever saw anyone doing anything that I didn't think I could do also. And we just need to encourage our young people to do that. And when they're trying to figure out how to do it, we need to give them a step-by-step process and procedures and give them all the support that they need. So thank you very much. God bless you. And look forward to seeing you, James.